Sunday night is when you would submit, so it's not a Monday morning or a Monday night. This one is a Sunday night, which we haven't done before. I did put on Google Classroom, I think it was last night, the academic integrity statement thing. You have through Monday to do that, so I'll give you another reminder on Monday. Don't forget to submit that Google Doc, but that is up there on Google Classroom that you can submit that. Remember, make sure you have 2 Grapes of Wrath chapters, expository chapters. And have to be 2 different chapters. Otherwise, it's your other 3 sources besides those ones. Works cited page would be for an outside source. You don't need a works cited page for the source that the sources that are being used in the synthesis essay. When you were doing your rough draft, remember I had you like highlight your counter argument in blue and do this in green and all that stuff. It doesn't have to be highlighted or anything like that in the final copy, but if you forget to like take it off, I'm not going to dock your points for it or something. So you don't need it there, but it's not something that has to be there.
We didn't have to like directly quote. Like we didn't have to take it directly.
There's no minimum direct quote requirement or anything like that. I would think you would probably want to have at least 1 or 2. Like generally speaking, with the synthesis sources, it's good to have a blend of some paraphrasing. Like I wouldn't quote every single one either, but it's not like the independent reading essay where you had to have so many quotes or citations per body paragraph. This is collectively throughout the whole thing, as long as you have the required amount, you're okay. And with the 2B verbs, remember you were allowed to go with has or had, have in your thesis statement, because you're talking about how disobedience has played a big part in American history or whatnot. So it doesn't have to have the word there, but you're not going to get penalized for that one.
Are we supposed to assume that whoever's reading the essay, which would obviously only be you, has seen the
Oh, you never know. I could spread them out to some other folks.
get it published and make money?
Yeah.
We should assume that you've seen the visual sources. And
yes.
so like we don't have to be like the picture has.
Correct. You don't have to describe what the visual source would be. And like for any kind of essay, you can always assume that the person has like read the book, read the work, or whatnot. I would just make sure that you prove, and not with the picture, but that you prove that you also have read the source or know the context of what's going on, because you don't want it to be, like clearly, Thoreau thinks the government's bad, and you just simply kind of move on. Well, how do you know that for sure, or whatnot? And so, especially, I think that's with independent reading books or anything. Just make sure you prove that you've read it as well. But no, you do not have to describe in the picture this is what's going on or anything along those lines. And email me some questions or send me a text reminder if you have anything. 11:30 Sunday night, I'll be sitting there waiting. I won't be.
I was just gonna say, yesterday you said you'd be done by 10:30.
I'd be done well before 10:30. Pretty sure about that. Maybe I'll check at like 9. After that, good luck. May the force be with you. I said to you next week we would definitely do literary term, or I said to you yesterday, next week we'd definitely do the 8th literary term quiz, which we will. We're not going to do one, this will be the last one we do before break. We're not going to do one that following week. We'll still get the last 2 in when we come back for the semester, but I want to make sure we got enough time with that last week to get ourselves ready for your Cuckoo's Nest TWA. So we'll get 10 in, but 8 will be our last one before we end up having a break. And you're finishing off the book for Friday of next week. All right. So, since I said to you about TWA, for today, I want to take a look, and this will still kind of give us some review with part 1, part 2. I want to take a look at what you see as being either rhetorical devices that are clearly present within the first 2 parts of the book, or potential devices that you kind of see maybe starting to take shape, maybe some kind of symbolism motif or whatnot, just to kind of get it present in your mind, to think about the rhetorical devices. Because the TWA that we'll do on the 20th of December, so that would be 2 weeks from yesterday, it's going to be an open-ended rhetorical analysis. Open-ended meaning you're not going to have a passage that you're going to read and analyze like you did for Kurtz, but more along the lines of the way that your Captain or ITWA was. You'll just have a general statement. So I'm making this up. Explain how he uses rhetorical devices to satirize the conflict with the American government. And then you would mention specific things that happen in the book. You're not going to have your book open, you're not going to be quoting, but you might talk about mechanical imagery and get into details about transmitters that run and things that everyone has, or when plastic's getting ripped open and rust and wires and whatnot are coming out. Those will still be specific references, even though you don't have the quote for it. So I want to just kind of think about what rhetorical devices do we see? What are some, even kind of thematic arguments that maybe are starting to take shape that you think you could end up having to write about? Because you're not going to know what your prompt is until fourth period on that Thursday. You'll sit down and at that point find out what you got. And Jesse will probably be wearing an elf hat while writing his TWA. I feel like you're the most likely candidate. I don't know. I would ask the same thing, but I just feel like you could do it.
Okay,
Or Chandler.
I'll do it.
Like, Chandler might do it. We'll see.
If we all wear a Santa hat during our TWA, will you give us a
I'd love that.
Yeah, you should call our scores up.
If we get you a Santa hat, we'll get everything.
No, you might lose ones. One year, the one kid got me a new sweater vest. That was nice.
Oh, wow.
Did you get extra
Did
credit?
you give him extra?
Probably not.
Was it a
Wow.
Christmas?
Probably. He has to say that legally.
Pretty sure he did.
Yes,
Yeah. So, whether it be based from things we said yesterday or other things, what do you see as things that Kesey's doing rhetorically, whether it be figurative language or other stuff, to kind of help maybe start to advance arguments?
Yeah, I was gonna
Would
say,
you ever get that idea?
can we continue that?
Yeah, we can. So mechanical imagery, so the transmitters, although that one, there's not really a whole lot of imagery with it because he kind of talks about it. Certainly Chief's dream sequence would be a good example. You could you could include the fog in with it as well, because of like the compressors and whatnot, and so just the idea that's a big part. Any other mechanical images or examples, whether profound or seems kind of subtle, pop up?
When you mentioned saying, like, look inside the bill, it's sort of like wire,
Okay.
Oh, yeah, true.
Just because you mentioned it, and certainly it would work as mechanical imagery. I don't want you going. Hallucinations are a rhetorical device that he uses. Now you certainly could talk about, and it is a device or certainly a purposeful decision on his point with the first person narrator. So the fact that Chief is your narrator allows him to do some things like including the hallucinations, but you're not going to go, he uses hallucinations to get points across. Because that in itself isn't going to be a device. But you could argue the point of view of the narrator is. Also, just because I'm mentioning narrator, what happens with Chief's chronological order from time to time?
Yes, it lapses.
It goes kind of back and forth, and I'd say especially as you get into the second half, there's more childhood examples that will come up. So, oops, not an E. Something as simple as flashbacks. You could certainly use. Going back to his childhood, we mentioned, and this would kind of go with the mechanical idea. Remember, there is the dam that is being built on the reservation, where you kind of start to get that beginning of this whole combine machine idea starting to take place. So yeah, plenty of mechanical stuff would absolutely be going on. What? Actually, going with mechanical. What was your favorite chapter in the Grapes of Wrath? Or for some of you, your least favorite chapter in the Grapes of Wrath? I was close.
Yeah.
I was thinking 3.
Whatever.
5's the bank. 3 is the... No, that's like with the bank and the tractor.
Okay.
3 is when you went, why in the world is there a whole chapter devoted to a stupid turtle crossing the road to get to the other side.
Because things
What's the conflict with the turtle? You got turtle on road, and you have turtle versus car.
Machine.
Yeah, machine. Do you remember anything kind of similar to turtle versus car in this book?
The dog.
dog.
We got dog versus car in the book.
That was
But it seems so stupid. Why would I want to mention car versus dog? And
because obviously it has some meaning. It's so stupid that it has some meaning.
do you remember when that happens? Like contextually?
No, I don't remember the events. I remember it was at night and he snuck out and he was watching the dog.
And he sneaks out of like his bed, out of his bunk. He's not outside. That way, you remember anything else? Because you mentioned it too.
There was
Ooh, we have geese and dog.
And
We have. I think you just said it.
and
We got animals: geese, dog, wolf, rabbit. Hens in a pecking party. I realized I still had my eyes shut. I had shut them when I'm on page 163. I had shut them when I put my face to the screen while I was scared to look outside. Now I had to open them. I looked out the window and saw for the first time how the hospital was out in the country. So, and we're going to go into more detail here with it, but I'm going to write some stuff down. Since we just included another device, animal imagery. Or you could argue, since it keeps kind of coming up, maybe a motif idea. He makes reference that he is able to see. What from the mechanical would kind of go along with his ability to see or his inability to see? The fog. The context of him in this scene is this is after the World Series vote, where he's raised his hand. And so, McMurphy's got all excited, and he's basically said at this point that McMurphy is trying to take him out of the fog. Now that he's out of the fog, oh my goodness, he can actually start to see. Funny how it kind of works out that way. The moon was low in the sky over the pasture land. The face of it was scarred and scuffed, where it had just torn up out of the snarl of scrub oak and madrone trees on the horizon. The stars up close to the moon were pale, and they got brighter and braver the farther they got out of the circle of light ruled by the giant moon. So you keep, you've got a lot of landscape description, which certainly would make sense for him with Native American heritage and whatnot. Next paragraph on 164, something moved on the grounds down beneath my window, cast a long spider of shadow out across the grass as it ran out of sight behind a hedge. When it ran back to where I could get a better look, I saw it was a dog. A young, gangly mongrel slipped off from home to find out about things went out on after dark. He was sniffing digger squirrel holes, not with the notion to go digging after one, but just to get an idea what they were up to at this hour. He'd run his muzzle down the hole, butt up in the air and tail going, and then dash off to another. Going over to the other page, and this is after he makes reference to the geese that Emma talked about. I listened to them fade away till all I could hear was my memory of the sound. That would be the geese. The dog could still hear them a long time after me, and he was still standing with his paw up. He hadn't moved or barked when they flew over. When he couldn't hear them anymore either, he commenced to lope off in the direction they had gone toward the highway, loping steadily and solemn like he had an appointment. I held my breath, and I could hear the flap of his big paws on the grass as he loped. Then I could hear a car speed up out of a turn. The headlights loomed over the rise and peered ahead down the highway. I watched the dog and the car making for the same spot of pavement. The dog was almost to the rail fence at the edge of the two grounds when I felt somebody slip up behind me, two people, and then it's Jeever and the nurse who are taking him away. So we don't see what happens. What does it imply could happen with the car and the dog? There could be collision. We don't know, but they're certainly going towards the same spot. You read it, and because it's a moment of clarity for Chief, I think it kind of jumps out as, okay, there could be some significance going on here. The thing for me that really kind of makes this passage, or emphasizes an aspect of this passage, is towards the end of part 1, after Cheswick has committed suicide, drowned in the pool, the guys are walking around on the grounds. This is on page 197. I dropped back till I was walking beside McMurphy, and I wanted to tell him not to fret about it, that nothing could be done, because I could see that there was some thought he was worrying over in his mind. This would be because of Cheswick's death. But some thought worrying over in his mind, like a dog worries at a hole that he don't know what's down. One voice saying, "Dog, that hole is none of your affair. It's too big and too black, and there's a spoor all over the place that says bear or something just as bad." And some other voice coming like a sharp whisper out of the way in his breed, not a smart voice, nothing cagey about it, saying, "Sick 'em, dog, sick 'em." What's he doing with the dog in this part? He's comparing McMurphy to a dog. Just a few pages before, we have a bit of a conflict getting mentioned with dog versus car. And now we have this dog kind of getting referenced again. Not only do you have dog getting mentioned twice, but the dog with the car sniffing around squirrel holes, seeing what's going on. Dog the second time around, when he's comparing McMurphy to the dog, don't put your head down that squirrel hole because you don't know what's down there. But then there's also something in him that's saying, "Sick 'em, dog, sick 'em." And what's the next move that McMurphy makes? Through the glass, breaking that barrier of control, starting to kind of go at Big Nurse a little bit after he's been taking a break. Car, mechanical. Combine, mechanical. What is McMurphy on the ward among the patients? He's essentially the alpha. Usually when you say alpha, what comes after it? Alpha dog. He is the one with the alpha male too, Grant. You're right, but we go alpha dog too. He is the alpha dog. He is the one who has the bark and the bite. So this idea, this comparison with him and the dog might be something to kind of keep an eye on. The fact that you have the dog and the machine in a head-to-head, potential collision, you could argue that might be something that would be happening in the near future. So that example on page 163 could be foreshadowing. Dog versus car, RPM, McMurphy versus Big Nurse. Any other foreshadowing get kind of hinted at, since that's what happens with foreshadowing. What does Big Nurse call McMurphy? He is an instigator. He is a non. If you're going to be in the hospital, if you're going to be in the ward, you have to do what to the rules? You have to abide by them. If you don't abide, obey, listen, then you are a non-conformist. All these unsaid things that you don't say. What do we do to nonconformists? You could, and then if that doesn't work, we're also going to send them to the shop. We had a nonconformist. His name was Mr. Tabor. He now listens because his brain, he's a success story. Who else would be someone who you could look at and go, that's what can happen?
The guy to
The one that everyone would definitely see, Ellis. Ellis, Tabor, really even Ruckley. Ruckley is the one that had the frontal castration, description of the lobotomy. That they admit was a kind of a botched job, did not do what it was supposed to. But these are examples of what can happen to you if you're too much of that alpha dog that you try to bite. If your bite starts to match your bark, then we'll end up kind of taking those things away. So you do have some potential, hey, this is what could happen to you if you push that, bless you, if you push that a little too far. So you have to now say whatever's going on in your head. But over to it.
Could you say like that there's a dramatic irony because the narrator isn't reliable?
So that like we the reader know.
Yeah, so that you
That
just
they're
kind of have to
hallucinating.
take some things with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, and you could, with depending upon how you wanted to, what you were hoping to do with it, the fact that you have this first-person narrator with the flashbacks, with the hallucinations, it certainly does kind of leave you wondering how reliable some things are. I wouldn't go quite dramatic irony in the sense that because we don't truly know what's happening. You know, whereas if you're reading Julius Caesar, you know it's not going to be good by the time scene 3 rolls around. Something bad's going to happen, whereas Caesar doesn't. But there's certainly, the impact of having a narrator who's unreliable, and it's still like a half-finished story. What you're starting to get out of Chief a little bit is some more clarity. So the fact that you have a narrator who hallucinates, who's paranoid, who's in the fog in the first part, and now is maybe kind of starting to come out of it, you get to see a better, or you get to read maybe a better impact as to what McMurphy can do to him and some other patients. Can't say that Chief's quite a dynamic character yet, but there certainly could be some change that's going about him. But for 100% sure, irony in itself is definitely present within the book. Where do we have irony? Besides everywhere.
Well, I mean, one of the big things is like throughout pretty much everything we've read, Chief keeps on insisting that everything in the book is true, this happened. But like when it comes to a guy being cut open and a whole bunch of rocks coming out of it, pretty sure that didn't happen.
And yet he's still pulled out on the gurney with the sheet over him the next day, so there's enough to kind of make you wonder. But okay, yeah. So there's certainly a blurred of lines of fact and fiction. But yeah, it's ironic that we, and this could, Grant, kind of go back to what you were saying, rely or trust an insane narrator. And it doesn't mean that you have to trust him, but at least that's who you're using to hold yourself accountable with what's happening within the story. It's kind of ironic that who's the hero? A bad man. Who's the villain? A nurse. A diminutive 50-year-old woman. You know, where can that happen? In the insane asylum. You know, you can have that kind of role reversal.
I guess there's also like, you know, calling her the big nurse, even though she's not really all that tall.
Like his perception of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so that could be something that if you want to strictly look at the fact, and keep in mind, Chief's the only one that calls her that. It's not that Cheswick's like, oh, big nurse is coming around.
Yeah,
It's just Chief, and so he associates size with power. So it's certainly going to be ironic that the big nurse has power, or refers to her as being big, whereas he's a 6'7", 6'8" large man who is as meek as they come. You could use that with irony. You also could certainly go with a size / like power motif, because it's something that he keeps coming back to over and over again. And really, motif is big in itself. Laughter motif, the idea of control. You know, the breaking of the glass protects that control panel. You got McMurphy trying to lift up the other control panel. So there's this idea of control, power, that there's a constant battle over. But certainly the idea of her being big, McMurphy's not big, tall, but he's broad, and Chief being small, yeah, could go with irony. Or if you want to look at how he keeps coming back to it over and over and over again, that as a size motif would certainly work.
I was gonna say if they are going to the hospital to like become better, but they're really becoming worse.
So yeah, does the hospital heal or harm? And in a lot of ways, it certainly seems that there's more harmful effects than there would be for healthful things to be happening. I think one of the great examples of irony is when does like nurse really get upset? Like she loses her cool, I'd say one time for sure. Like she gets flustered or frustrated from time to time, but she really kind of loses it one time. Yeah. She's yelling at a bunch of patients / inmates for doing what? Watching a blank screen. So they're perfectly quiet. They're just huddled there around the TV, and she's flipping out on them. And so if you were like just to walk by, and she even makes the comment, if someone were to walk by and didn't know what was going on, they would think that the nurse is the one who should be in the insane asylum because just picture like I know they're not kids, but just watching a blank screen, not doing anything. Stop doing that! How dare you disrespect my authority and all this? And they're just simply sitting there. So you could even argue that, and depending upon what some other examples could be, where the TV scene is going to be ironic. But you could also argue that maybe there's a little bit of irony in what our definitions are of sane versus insane. The way that we perceive those things, is it true? Is there validity to it? Or do we kind of twist it to where there's a little bit more of irony to the use of those terms as opposed to what they actually would mean or could be?
Oh, what about like dramatic irony? We know that Chief can hear and can speak, but like staff doesn't.
That's true. Yeah, and with Grant kind of mentioning that before, that would be one where we're aware of what the other characters would not be. Yeah, good call. Anything else off the top of people's heads?
Don't you think that the hospital would kind of have like records of like his past because like, we know that he like spoke to his mother, he spoke to other people when he went to school, and in the war he was most likely working on radios and talking over the radios. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would think certainly in today's world, I mean, obviously with books you always got that blurring of, what the way reality would be as opposed to the details that we're going to use for the story. I don't know if records are a little shoddier in the 40s and 50s and 60s because it literally is more of a paper trail, as opposed to let's pull up Jesse's records on the laptop or see what we have for Zach. Oh, his height and weight, in 4th grade was this, because you can just pull it up at any time. So I could see maybe kind of like a loss of those things. But no, your point's well taken with it. I do think that the fact that he's Native American is there's certainly a stereotype or prejudice against him that he's just a quote unquote dumb Indian. And I don't mean dumb in the sense of not speaking, but intelligence. And so the fact that all he would do is speak and not hear could, I think people wouldn't be shocked by that. The other thing, since I said shocked, who knows if it's true or not, but the rumor is he said more ESD than anyone else. So his capabilities also could kind of start to diminish, could be a side effect or looked at as, hey, he's been shocked, not to death, but to deafness, to the point where his mind just doesn't work anymore. So I think kind of a combination of all those things, they don't expect anything from him. The fact that he's going to look through the old mechanical magazines in the library, since he used to work with be an electrician and whatnot, they wouldn't assume that he was someone who would have intelligence enough to do that, just because of the stereotype that would go along with it. And like yesterday, we talked about where you have, if you're going with the Combine as being the government, Combine being the establishment, the man, the authority. And the idea that, all right, the one who has to carry out the deeds of the Combine are the minorities in the sense of African Americans and women. Who is getting kind of punished? Who's getting persecuted? The Native Americans, the homosexuals, those who don't feel that they kind of fit in. So he fits that stereotype as being an outcast because he's not a quote-unquote red-blooded American. So I think all of the people who are kind of being persecuted here, there's some kind of weakness about them that's trying to be exploited. But probably the EST, I think, might be from a medical standpoint. His mind doesn't work anymore. Could be something with it.
Do you think that like Ken Kesey intended to be making commentary about like people are only happy with minorities if they can exploit what they would be used for?
Yeah, I think so. Because there's a lot. Because in a lot of his early writing, especially this time, there's a lot of exploitation. Period. Most of them are set in the Northwest. Sometimes a Great Notion, his next book, you're dealing with exploitation of a small, like, logging town that kind of needs to change to keep up with the way. So it doesn't fit with that mainstream. Someone was also, asking. He was taking a lot of drugs. Does he really know what he was doing? Yeah, I think so. I think there's enough credibility to his craft. He's a well-regarded writer beforehand. He's a well-regarded writer afterhand. He does kind of become a little bit of a loose cannon, but this is a guy who's really kind of practiced and honed his craft for a long time. And they kind of play off that a little bit. And with the things I have up here, we actually already looked at that second passage before. First one, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Actually, ravening. Yeah. The ravening ravens. The ravening ravens. The ravening ravens raven. Like wolves.
Ravenous raven.
Anyone that you could see kind of connecting to that? I can think of three, like, fairly quickly. McMurphy being one. Because what don't we really know about McMurphy? What's his ultimate plan? We know he likes to gamble. We know he likes to make money. Hey, let's have fun. Let's play cards. Let's play Monopoly, but I'm going to keep track of all the money and the cigarettes and all that kind of stuff. The fact that this is a term that gets used, I would hope you align with a specific character, the nurse. Question mark McMurphy. Question mark nurse. It's pretty interesting that, hey, the sheep's clothing. Think of sheep? What do you think of? Color white. So, uniform, diminutive, but yet she's still big nurse. And this kind of like leads into the second one, which we've actually already talked about that passage earlier on in the year with the white sepulcher. But as a whole, I think you could say not just McNurse, not just nurse, but the whole what? Hospital. Place you're going to feel better. You're going to get better. You'll be rehabilitated. You can enter back into society, but when it's all said and done, you might be worse off than you were when you entered. Hypocrites, whited sepulcher, also here kind of like the nurse, beautiful outward. And also, quite often when it comes to nurse, how do they describe like her skin and all that kind of stuff? Harding will talk about her white porcelain, enamel, beautiful, dainty, kind of skin, but she does wield a lot of power, full of dead man's bones. Do we have any dead men? Who do we have? We got Cheswick. We got Rawler from upstairs. And then we have a whole host of folks who may not be physically dead, but for the most part, they're not really working anymore. Who would be a pretty good example, especially of someone who there's not a whole lot left? Remember, Alice is the one who's kind of chained to the wall and just like stuck in that cross position for the most part. Does Kesey purposely make allusions to these two things? That I don't know. I think it's interesting how they kind of match up. I would say moving forward, you will start to pick up on, because he's going to make it pretty clear that there's definitely some religious illusions that are starting to happen. And I mean, the EST table for the shop, it's in the shape of a cross. You have Ellis kind of stuck to the wall, and then, oh my goodness, Ellis is Jesus. That's not the argument that he's making, although he does kind of baptize McMurphy. He pees on him when he first comes in, so he steps back, Emma, because he gets peed on. He's, not holy water, but it's the water we have here in the hospital. But certainly could be at the very least symbolic of, hey, this is what goes on here. This is what you could ultimately become. Do you want to be like that guy? Do you want to be essentially a martyr? That you're not going to conform? Fine, this is what's going to happen. Are you going to conform, or are you going to, go sacrifice yourself? We had the pain article from last week. Are you going to sacrifice that slender eye for what it takes to be a person who's going to kind of constitute change? So illusions would certainly be something to keep an eye on moving forward. I think as you go through parts 3 and 4, you'll see that this becomes much more in your face and apparent with it. Keep in mind that yesterday we were talking about it's a portrayal of American society, it's a portrayal of American government, it's a portrayal of the way that people tend to look at others, maybe a lot how those in power look at the weaker ones, minorities, whatever the case may be, that this is meant to be in some ways a satirical commentary. So if you are going to have satire, you are certainly going to have those elements of irony, which we were talking about. There's going to be elements of humor, which there is some pretty dark comedic aspects to it, where you might kind of chuckle and go, oh, probably shouldn't laugh at that, but it's still kind of funny. And you tend to have exaggeration, which with a mentally unstable narrator who hallucinates and is paranoid, those things are certainly bound to be there. So all the ingredients that are necessary for a satire are certainly present. The question is, anytime you're dealing with a satire, what is it that really needs to be reformed? What is the solution that is being offered? Those will be things that we'll hopefully try to figure out next Friday. Weekend synthesis, submit that by Sunday. Not that the synthesis is not a big deal, because it's a significant thing, but that's your only thing that you're going over the weekend. You don't have to worry about any additional stuff for Monday. Starting Monday, we're just going to in-house class stuff while you're reading the book. Finish it. Okay. And then Emma will take off next Friday. Have a good weekend.
Would emasculation be considered a motif?
Yeah. For as long as it is something that keeps coming up, it can be motif. Should you use motif, you don't want, say you do motif, like emasculating motif or fog. Don't go, it happens with Roller, therefore it's a motif, because by definition it has to keep occurring. So you just want to make sure you highlight the multiple times it comes up, not just one single one.